The Weaponized Womb, Mapping Reproductive Violence as a Tool of Ethnic Cleansing. From the New Lines Institute, by Klara Vlahčević Lisinski, Washington, D.C., Tuesday, October 14, 2025. The genocidal war in Ethiopia's Tigray region, which erupted in November 2020 between the Tigray People's Liberation Front and a coalition of Ethiopian federal forces, Amhara regional militias, and Eritrean troops, quickly devolved into one of the most brutal and underreported humanitarian crises of the decade. At the center of this violence was a gendered campaign of terror, widespread and deliberate sexual and reproductive violence, SRV, targeting Tigrayan women and girls. This violence was not incidental to the conflict but formed a strategic axis of ethnic cleansing, deployed through the systematic destruction of women's bodies, reproductive autonomy, and societal roles. As Ethiopian and Eritrean troops advanced into Tigrayan towns and villages, women became targets of extreme brutality. Survivor testimonies collected in displacement camps and medical clinics describe a pattern of sexual violence marked by rape, gang rape, forced impregnation, sexual slavery, genital mutilation, and sterilization. These acts followed military incursions with haunting regularity, particularly in places like Humera, Adigrat, and Shire. Women were often told during their assaults that they were being punished for their ethnicity and that their wombs would be cleansed of Tigrayan blood, a chilling articulation of intent that was repeated in numerous survivor accounts. SRV committed by armed combatants in Tigray is characterized by its scale, coherence, brutality, and unmistakable ethnic and gendered intent. The female body was weaponized as a battleground to extinguish the reproductive capacity of an ethnic group and shatter the cohesion of its communities. In countless cases, rape was paired with physical mutilation that left survivors infertile, disabled, or suffering chronic pain. Forced pregnancies were not only tolerated by occupying forces, they were part of the message. In many instances, access to emergency contraception or abortion was deliberately denied, and the denial of post-rape care was used as a tactic to deepen harm. The consequences for survivors extend well beyond the battlefield. Many women now face lifelong trauma compounded by stigma, rejection by their families, or forced parenthood of children born of rape. In Tigrayan culture, as in many others, sexual violence carries immense social stigma, further isolating victims and silencing their stories. The psychological damage of these crimes is deepened by the lack of medical care, social services, or avenues for justice. Women and girls displaced by the conflict, both internally within Ethiopia or across borders, suffer quietly, navigating chronic pain and shame in isolation. The New Lines Institute report, Conflict-Related Sexual and Reproductive Violence in Tigray, identifies a clear geographic and temporal correlation between the advance of Ethiopian and Eritrean forces into Tigrayan territories and the occurrence of SRV. As these forces moved into new areas, reports of mass rape, genital mutilation, and forced sterilization surged. This pattern suggests that SRV was not merely a byproduct of war, but a strategic tool employed to achieve military and political objectives. The use of SRV in Tigray aligns with patterns observed in other conflicts where rape has been recognized as a tactic aimed at destroying an ethnic group, such as in Bosnia and Rwanda, demonstrated that this was not an isolated atrocity but rather a symptom of gendered power structures that persist in conflicts worldwide. Despite this, international justice systems remain ill-equipped to address gendered genocidal strategies effectively. The slow pace of legal recognition, under-resourced mechanisms for documenting SRV, and the lack of survivor-centered accountability processes hinder efforts to bring perpetrators to justice. The Tigray case illustrates how mass sexual violence can be systematically deployed with the intent to destroy an ethnic group, yet remain under-recognized as an act of genocide, despite overwhelming qualifying evidence. Impunity for these crimes cannot be separated from the way women's experiences are often sidelined in post-conflict justice and policy. In Ethiopia, there is little political will to prosecute SRV cases, especially those implicating state actors. Survivors who come forward risk harassment, retaliation, or re-traumatization. Without international intervention and survivor-centered frameworks, most perpetrators will not be held to account, and most survivors will go unheard. Addressing this requires more than legal innovation. It requires reimagining justice and recovery through a gendered lens. That begins with recognizing that SRV is not a side effect of war, but a method of warfare that specifically targets women's bodies, choices, and futures. Reparative systems must prioritize not only legal accountability but also comprehensive physical and psychological care. Ensuring that survivors receive comprehensive and sustained support, not only in the immediate aftermath but throughout their long-term recovery, must be a key priority of any meaningful transitional processes. Efforts to rebuild Tigrayan society must involve survivors at the center, not on the margins. Documentation is another critical front. The report notes that real-time evidence gathering was hampered by blackouts, displacement, and stigma. Many survivors did not, or could not, seek help in time for their injuries to be recorded, while others feared the social cost of speaking. Moving forward, civil society organizations need the tools and funding to document SRV safely and confidentially, even during conflict. Survivors must be empowered, not re-traumatized, by this process. Prevention, too, requires gendered foresight. SRV does not erupt in a vacuum, it is preceded by warning signs, dehumanizing propaganda, militarization of civilian spaces, impunity for prior sexual crimes, and nationalist ideologies that fuse ethnic purity with control over women's reproduction. These indicators must be integrated into early warning systems and peacekeeping mandates. Gender-based atrocity should never again catch the international community by surprise.
Thank you very much, Natasha.
Evelina, I know it's graphic, but describe to us what is happening to women and girls in the Tigray region of Ethiopia.
Sure. Of course, recent months have seen a lot of evidence coming from the region, shedding light on the dire situation of Tigrayans in Ethiopia. And of course, we've seen evidence of mass killings. We've seen evidence of torture, abductions, and many other atrocities. But of course, this evidence was followed also by evidence of the use of rape and sexual violence against Tigrayan women. And at the end of January 2021, we've seen evidence from the UN Special Representative on sexual violence in conflict, Pramila Patten, reporting on the serious allegations of sexual violence in Tigray, including a high number of alleged rapes in the capital of Mekelle. But subsequently, of course, the more and more evidence emerged. And of course, this brings us to this new report produced by Amnesty International and published only a few days ago that adds to the evidence. It concludes that sexual violence in the context of the conflict has been accompanied by a shocking level of brutality, including beatings, death threats, and ethnic slurs. And it is often accompanied by threats and by additional acts of physical and psychological torture. And as one of the Tigrayan women who testified reported, they raped me one after the other. I don't know if they realized I was pregnant. I don't know if they realized I was a person. Some of the abused women and girls were held in sexual slavery for several weeks. And as Amnesty International concludes, the patterns of sexual violence emerging from survivors indicate that the violations have been a part of a strategy to terrorize, degrade, and humiliate both the victims and the ethnic group. And of course, we already mentioned that of course there are so many perpetrators involved in the atrocities, and it's very important to emphasize that Amnesty International classified the atrocities as crimes against humanity or war crimes, but we cannot forget that these atrocities can also amount to genocide. They could be genocidal methods to bring about the destruction of the community. So this is yet another element that needs to be.
Absolutely, and forgive me for jumping in, but you did mention this issue of genocide and ethnic cleansing to a certain degree, I believe. So I just want to quote something that the Prime Minister of Ethiopia has mentioned, which is referencing the Tigray people as a cancer and wanting them wiped out. So, as succinctly as you possibly can.
Latest barrage came in an Amharic tweet this week. It characterizes the Tigrayans as weeds. We will work to remove the weed, but while removing the weed, we will try our best not to damage the wheat. Many observers have characterized his comment as dehumanizing. In the same statement, he also called the Tigrayans a cancer and a devil. His opponents accuse Ahmed of committing genocide.
For the past few months, what I really want to talk to you all about is what he said in regards to the reports of rape and sexual violence being used as a weapon of war in the conflict. Here's a short clip from his address in response to a question about these rapes.
ሰብአዊ መብት ጥሰት የሚሰቃዩ ትግራይ ስላለው ችግር የሚሰቃዩ ሰዎች የሰሜን ዕዝ ጥቃት በሚመለከት ምንም አያነሱ። ሰሜን ዕዝ እንኳን ተጠቃም ተዋረደ። ሴቶች እኮ አሁን በወንድ የተደፈሩት የኛ ወታደሮች ግን በሳንጃ ተደፍረዋል።
For those of you who can't speak Amharic, he basically said, while their women might have been raped, our soldiers were stabbed with daggers. Now, in my opinion, this is one of the most disgusting things I've seen a head of state say in my lifetime. I may only be in my early 20s, but Jesus Christ, he basically just equated the mass rape of thousands of women who have nothing to do with the warring parties involved who are actually, fighting this conflict. He compared their rape to the killing of soldiers who sign up to die. Like, I'm sorry, I have respect for all those who decide to go into military service. But as a soldier, you are accepting the real possibility that you will be killed in combat. So to compare this rampant sexual violence against the Tigrayan women, to compare that to killing soldiers who sign up to die in combat is just mind-blowing.